Go looking for people to take advantage of you, and they generally will. See the world as a dog-eat-dog place, and you'll always find a bigger dog looking at you as if you're his next meal. Go looking for the best in people, and you'll be amazed at how much talent, ingenuity, empathy, and goodwill you'll find. Ultimately, the world treats you more or less the way you expect to be treated. So that was a little bit from the book The Go-Giver, and with me to discuss it today is Amy Getz. So Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so fun to reconnect with you, Mickey.
It is. It's been a while. This is awesome. As with all of our shows here, you picked this book, which is one I've loved years ago, but tell us a bit, why don't you kick us off here? Why'd you pick The Go-Giver? What stood out to you? What makes it so important in your life?
So this book was recommended to me sort of when I first started my entrepreneurial journey, and I was in the space of devouring all the things and learning. And this particular book touched my heart so deeply. I picked it back up as I was preparing for this podcast, and I had so many notes and stickies. And it just, I feel like, actually changed the way I chose to do business and the way I chose to show up in the world. And one of the funny stories I have about this book is Bob Burg literally is the human that he presents in this book. So a friend connected me with him on LinkedIn, and I reached out and just let him know how meaningful this book was to me and how much I appreciated him writing it. And how when my children graduate from college, I have 3 kids, that I wanted to gift them this book because I felt like it was such a beautiful entry into how we should show up in the world, whether that's in business or personal or otherwise.
Love that.
And he so lovingly offered to write book plates for them and mail them to me. So this lovely man asked for the names of my children and wrote individual sticky, stickers to put inside the books, so that when I give them to my kids when they graduate as part of one of their gifts, they have an autographed version. And I just thought, goodness gracious, like I would have never asked for that, but he just genuinely offered, and it just touched me so deeply. And I'm like, clearly, this man is living everything that he's teaching. And like, what a beautiful example.
Wow, that is fantastic. I've not reached out to him before, but maybe I will now. Not to get something like that, but just, I don't want to bother people like that. But as he talks about in the book, the higher up people are, generally the more they're wanting to connect with us little folks, So yeah.
Yes, and especially as I was sort of newer in that entrepreneurial journey and really kind of felt like somebody less important, if you will, as compared to the author of such a phenomenal book. So right. Just such a genuine, lovely human. And I know there's been so many iterations of The Go-Giver, and this one is sort of my tried and true.
That's awesome.
Of different versions. Yes. And it's interesting. Like one of the things, and I literally wrote OMG in the in the sidebar of the book, and something that stood out to me, and I feel like that changed who I was it's a quote that he's referring to in the book, and it's that somebody said, when I said that my life as a mom, wife, and household manager left me with nothing the marketplace wanted, I was wrong. There was something else I'd learned over those years, and that was how to be a friend, how to care, how to make people feel good about themselves. And that, my friends, is something the marketplace wants very much, always has and always will. And just a little bit about my journey is I was a corporate CPA by trade, but I had 3 kids in 4 years. So I stayed home for over a decade and volunteered, was PTA president, all the things. And when I was gifted the opportunity to get back into the workspace, I was questioning my own worth and what I had to offer. And again, finding this towards the beginning of that journey, that really spoke to me and has actually proven to be very true in my own life. Having served on a million volunteer capacities, treasurer of everything from preschool to the high school lacrosse team, it speaks into what I do. I'm a financial professional and I serve people. And so that particular quote spoke so deeply to me at that time, and recognizing that we just have to show up authentically in who we are. We just have to serve from a place of kindness and gratitude, and then watch the world shift and mold into just exactly what you want it to around you. So such a profound, that was under the law of authenticity, which, as you know, if you haven't read this book, Mickey and I were talking, it's centered around the 5 laws. And so that's one that I just kind of jumped right into. But
yeah, cool. We'll jump in. Yeah, we'll jump into those in a second. We're jumping ahead. It's all good though.
Place that I wrote OMG in the margin, and I thought that one's pretty important. So
that's awesome. Yeah, we'll hit the 5 laws in a moment. I think for those that haven't read the book though, so the title, The Go-Giver, kind of gives it away in a way. But could you give like the 20-second summary of what the book's about, and then we'll kind of unpack the laws?
Yeah, it's actually a lovely story about a gentleman who is really serving and himself and trying to make a big deadline at work and wondering how he's going to make it happen. And there's someone at his office that he sees that seems to have everything he wants, but it doesn't make sense. So, somewhat in desperation, he reaches out, and this person introduces him to someone that kind of goes through and says, if you're willing to learn these laws and implement them in your life, then I'll be your mentor. And this person, Joe, being, quite flabbergasted and thinking, how am I going to do this? And do I even deserve this? And watching his life change over the course of the week as he's introduced to people and learning the different laws. So It's actually a very quick, enjoyable read with a lot of really important takeaways that you can just glean very quickly. Like I said, I reread it yesterday, and it was just as enjoyable yesterday as it was the first time that awesome. I read it. And so, yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. So it's
perfect. Yeah. Let's dig into the 5 laws, though. So, yeah, you mentioned, so Joe is kind of the hero of the story here. He's the one that's struggling. We'll kind of walk through it. And Pindar is the one that is guiding him through this to help him learn the 5 laws. So the 5 laws of stratospheric success.
Yes.
So the first law is, yeah, for real. The first law is the law of value. Your true worth is determined by how much more you give in value than you take in payment. Can you unpack that one a little bit?
Yeah, I love this one. And actually, this is sort of how I've chosen to show up in my own professional life. But it's like, as you give, when you are giving, and not necessarily, we're all concerned about payment. But the point is when you're giving from service, giving from a place of loving and genuinely wanting to be in the space where you serve, when you're able to show up in that sense, you're going to receive tenfold back when you're not in the expectation of giving to get. And that's sort of how I choose to live my life, and especially how I choose to show up in how I serve people. I'm a financial advisor, and I don't charge for a financial plan. I delight in giving someone an hour of my time to helping them figure out what their financial freedom date is and their path to getting there, because it's of service to me to share that message with the world. And so this first law speaks so deeply to me. And I think it's important if we all just show up and love what we do and show up from a place of serving others and wanting to put our best foot forward and change the world, then all of that's going to come back to us in a powerful way.
To quote Charlie Munger, I have nothing to add. That was fantastic. So yeah, let's move on to the second one. Well said there. So the second law is the law of compensation. Your income is determined by how many people you serve and how well you serve them. So these laws kind of overlap a bit. I think you kind of hit this a bit, but yeah, why don't you unpack the law of compensation a bit further, if you would?
Right, but it's basically saying that, to the point of, you will be compensated when you show up from a place of service. And we don't need to cap our income by way of saying, well, if I give away knowledge or information or my talent, that somehow we're not going to be paid accordingly. In fact, it's sort of elevating that to the place of, if you just give truly of who you are, the compensation comes back in a much greater way, other than just this, and the income follows. But really, part of that compensation too is just the feeling that you get from living in integrity. And of course, when you're in that space, the financial rewards are, of course, going to come back to you. And I think this is real. I'm in the space of abundance and money. And it's really important for me to stress like gratitude and giving for people, because when you can get yourself in that space, then money is energy. It's going to flow back to you. So when you're showing up in a way that is of service, and not with money as the first thing is what you're going to get by way of dividends in return, it automatically comes. So that's sort of my take on that.
Gotcha. I love that. Well said.
Yeah.
The third law is the law of influence. Your influence is determined by how abundantly you place other people's interests first.
Again, such a simple concept, right? But when you show up in service to others, when you show up not necessarily looking to have your own needs served in that instance, but you're showing up to make sure that you're serving others, meeting them where they are, elevating them from the place that they need your help, then you are going to, your influence is going to be greater. They're going to want to refer you. When you show up to say, let me serve you. And if I can't serve you, let me connect you with someone that can. Like we're all in this entrepreneurial space. Referrals are always the number one way to receive business. But
Yep.
if you're going in seeking that by way of compensation, it's inevitable that it doesn't happen that way. But when you are showing up in service and you are saying, look, I might not be the person to help you, but I know someone that can, like, who isn't going to want to then refer your name as someone who's honest, full of integrity, and that's my take on the third law.
Yeah,
Love
and I love that. Yeah, and it is. Some of these are almost counterintuitive. Like your influence is increased by putting other people's interests first. But that's, I mean, we've all seen that in life too, and that the book explains that so well. So,
And I love that you say that it is counterintuitive, because, like, let's upend things, right? Let's flip them on their head, right? And change the sort of the paradigm and how the world, right, sees humanity. I think if we all started living more into these laws, imagine like the change and elevation of just the community around us.
oh, for sure. Yeah, well
Yeah.
said. The fourth law is the law of authenticity. The most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself.
Yeah, and I think this one to me is super important, and just my own personal slant on that is show up in who you are. Don't try and be someone else that you are. And again, in the space of money, I often like to remind people, because they can look around and determine their own worth by way of comparison. And I always say, don't assume because something looks a certain way that it is a certain way, right? Like, it's that millionaire next door concept. And so I think showing up as yourself without airs, just being authentically who you are, is going to attract the right and perfect people that you're meant to serve, that are meant to elevate you, that are meant to be your best referral partners. So living into that. And this is something that I think even for my own self, my mentor is an amazing man. And in my particular profession, financial advising, there tends to be a bit of a male and pale slant towards that. And I'm not at all negative towards men. I'm just very pro women. But when I decided that I was going to serve people by way of my own intuitive gifts and my own feminine, nature, it's when my business changed. When I decided I didn't have to be anyone but myself. I didn't have to show up like my mentor. I could learn from him and deliver the same message, but do it in my own voice. That's when my business started to shift. So I would encourage anyone else to say, be authentically who you are, because that's going to attract the right and perfect people.
Yep. Yeah, the interesting balance Seth Godin talks a lot about is authenticity versus consistency, though, too, where being too authentic can almost be problematic at times if you bring your personal struggles into the office when people want you to be consistent. So it's kind of an interesting balance to have to face.
Well, very true.
Yeah.
I think of authenticity by way of just your character.
Yes.
Right?
I love you. I love your
whatever
angle
core
on it.
values are. If you're showing up consistently in your core values, for whatever that is for you, right? Mine are integrity. Mine is to have fun. Mine is to be loyal and of service. When you show up in your core values, I think consistency is a great measure there. But by way of authenticity, agreed. Keep your personal business at home, but show up in your value system.
And I think it depends what you do too. Seth's example is often like a heart surgeon. Like, you don't care for your heart surgeon to be authentic. You want to be consistent. And so I think it matters a lot what you're doing. And but you're serving people in their times of need and stuff. So I think being authentic to who you are and what you bring is fantastic. So
I love that too. Okay.
And then the fifth and final law is the law of receptivity. The key to effective giving is to stay open to receiving.
I love this one so much. And I think I don't want to be overgeneral, but I sometimes think women especially have a hard time receiving, right? We want to be the ones that are, serving the family, serving our children, serving the community. But I have learned in my own walk that, if you can give, but if you're not open to receiving, then you're kind of blocking the flow of that additional energy exchange. And so I would encourage everyone to recognize that, even for my own self, like, it is a gift when I get to show up for someone else. And so when someone else would block that or not receive that sort of stops the flow. So again, just like in the story, right? The Joe was being served by Pendar and he didn't necessarily feel worthy in the beginning, but the point was he was open to receiving and he ended up getting so much more than he anticipated. And then also by way of giving back more than he anticipated. So I think this is really important for us to recognize. And even if we're in a space where maybe I call it time, talent, and treasure. Maybe you're not at a place where you're able to give of your treasure by way, but we all have time and talent to give. And I think when we can be open to giving something of ourselves, it opens us up to receiving tenfold for that.
Yep. And this one, I struggle with this one. I think a lot of people struggle with receiving sometimes. They don't want to take advantage of or whatever, but I always look at it through the opposite lens. If I'm offering you something and say, Amy, I want to talk to you and I can help you with your website or whatever, let me just give you some stuff, and you turn it down, it makes me feel bad. You've turned it down maybe out of politeness or whatever, but it's actually made things worse for me. It's like, oh, but I wanted to help her. And so I try to look at it from the opposite side. When someone wants to help me and wants to offer their time, talents, and treasure, like, I should allow them to, because they want to. It'll make them feel better, and it'll probably benefit me with the advice or whatever I get back. So I try to spin that around and think about the times, I get
and it keeps
shot
it
down
flow.
and offering.
Yeah, it keeps it flowing, right? To you and from you and through you. I think it's important to recognize that if we were all, even in the best case scenario, if we were all giving and there were no one receiving, I mean, that kind of stops where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Like nothing's happening at that point.
Right.
So when you put it in that sort of basic and simple terms, it helps you recognize, like, oh yeah, like that there is an opportunity for me to serve by receiving.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. So in the book, these 5 laws are the 5 days of the week. Each day they work on a law, and Joe and Pindar go visit someone, and they it's a nice little story to go through it. So it's worth reading the book. Again, as Amy pointed out, it's a short book, but the 5 laws: the law of value, compensation, influence, authenticity, and receptivity. A few other little pieces I want to hit too. There's some other little quotes I really liked. There was one, this is a quote from the book. It said, "You see," Pindar continued, "the majority of people operate with a mindset that says to the fireplace, first give me some heat, then I'll throw on some logs. Or that says to the bank, give me interest on my money, and then I'll make a deposit." And of course, it just doesn't work that way. And that I think is kind of a good summary of the book too. Is like, you got to give first, and then you will receive. You throw some logs on the fire, you're getting way more back in return, but you got to put the logs in first, So I kind of love that.
I think that's a really good one. I can vividly remember reading that and highlighting and underlining and being like, oh, because we all too, I think, need visuals in life. I think when we can have sort of a visual to represent some of those concepts, it helps us to solidify them even more. And I love how the book does that by way of the story itself. So absolutely, I think that's a really good one.
Gotcha. Awesome. So any final thoughts for folks that haven't read the book? Any lessons you want to make sure they take home or make sure they pick up as they read it themselves?
I mean, first of all, I would encourage everyone to read the book. And I would also say that it kind of touches all genders and it touches all generations, right? Whether you're someone that's just graduating or whether you're a seasoned business professional, I think it's a book that you could pick up, quickly read, and feel like you have some key takeaways immediately. Rarely do you read a book and oftentimes they're very dense. And I think this one is such a relatable story. It makes it really easy. And I think it makes it accessible and in such a language that allows you to shift some of those maybe limiting beliefs or some of your core mindsets that might be holding you back. And I think it's a book that offers joy and expansion. And yeah, it did actually truly change how I showed up and served.
So Amy, this was fantastic. I appreciate your insights here. It is a awesome book. I encourage people to check it out. If people want to learn more about you, how can they find and connect with you online?
Yes, thank you very much. So Amy Getz, I work for IRC Wealth. Our website is ircwealth.com. My email is amy@ircwealth, and I am on LinkedIn as Amy Getz. I would delight in connecting with each and every one of you. If you want to talk about the book, you want to talk about money, or you just want to talk about networking, I'd be delighted to make that connection.
Awesome. That's fantastic, Amy. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.